cannot see on YouTube and CTN. Just wanted to thank you all for being here. As you've seen from the agenda, we intend to have what we hope to be more of a collaborative opportunity to speak to both DEEP and DPH. That was my understanding about hopefully this presentation. I know they each will have their own slides, but the point of this opportunity to speak to them again was really just to understand how they work together in this conversation and how that might help inform what we recommend as a committee moving forward. So with that said, I think we'll start with DPH because
Donna, I see the senator there, not to interrupt.
I did not.
Just want to recognize the senator.
Yeah, I didn't know if she was going to join
Yeah,
us. I can't see her on my screen.
She just joined.
Okay. There you go.
Hi, Senator.
Hi, Senator.
Hi, everyone. No need to say anything, just happy to be here and glad to get started. So sorry, I was hopping on a little bit late.
No problem. Thanks to Lori for letting me know that you were there. I couldn't see you on my screen. Okay, so we'll start with DPH. I know Matt was teed up and he was here perfectly on time. So I'll turn it over to Matt. And I don't know if Will has given you permissions to share your screen.
Let me see here. Let me give it a shot. And you guys will let me know. It looks like he has.
Perfect.
You folks see this?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'll get it on presentation mode and I'll get started. Let's see. Okay. Everybody can see it clearly. Looks good. Great. All right, guys. As Lori had mentioned, Lori Matthew, is that this is sort of a brief presentation I'll be giving, just sort of an overview of our program once again, and also just the roles of who covers what in terms of sewage disposal in the state of Connecticut. So my name is Matthew Pollock. I work for DPH in the environmental health section and the program known as the environmental engineering program. We handle on-site sewage, and we also handle other things like body disposal, pools, and campgrounds as well. So we do it all. But at any rate, today I'm here to talk about on-site sewage, and I'll get started just to give you a brief overview of the agenda here. Again, I'm just going to go over responsibilities, our regulatory, statutory responsibilities, whose jurisdiction is for what, and again, the roles of the local health departments. So the reason why I'm going to go over this again too, some of this stuff is review, is some of the comments that we've seen shared with us and some of the questions. I think I needed to reiterate some of these things because I think there might have been some of a misunderstanding of who handles what and that kind of thing. So that's sort of the purpose of this as well, to go over this stuff again. So let me get started. So the primary role for us is to administer what we call the technical standards document. So it's a cookbook design for septic system design in the state of Connecticut for on-site sewage disposal systems for flows less than 7,500 gallons per day or less. And it does not include alternative technology systems. So it's simply a septic tank followed by a leaching system. Just in its simplest form. So we have to approve all those components. And our technical standard document is periodically updated to reflect any changes in technologies and in practices that we do for on-site sewage disposal. We also spend an awful lot of time discussing or assisting, I should say, the local health departments. And I'm going to talk about a little bit later exactly what their role is and why we do that. But at any rate, we spend a lot of time, we're the experts, we're the ones that keep the regulations. So we're the ones that they look to for assistance when things get tough. And we also train them initially as well. So, and that's been a tough thing lately with what I call the Great Retirement. Seeing a lot of retirements across every industry there, and local health is definitely part of that. And so we're seeing a great need for a lot of these sanitarians coming in and needing training on just about everything, obviously, including sewage. So just to continue on a little bit more with our responsibilities. We also assist engineers as well and licensed installers. We provide them technical assistance. There's specific things that we actually have to do at the state level, exceptions, for instance, that come to us for different things like offsite septic system, or if your septic repair happens to be within proximity to a well, you have no other options, that actually has to come to us for specific review. So initially it goes to the locals, but it does come to us for an extra level of review. So it's something that we do. As I previously mentioned, we train and approve local health department staff to review and approve septic systems. We also deal with complaint investigations. Complaints would be against licensed installers, since our office licenses the septic installers, and cleaners, for that matter. Cleaners would be the people that pump the septic tanks out, and also local health officials. Sanitarians have a license, an RS license. So if there was any issues related to sewage with their conduct that was not in line with the regulations, we would have to take action. And lastly, we do actually review and approve large system plans specifically. So a large plaza, if you will, or a school, something typically other than a residential home, although we do occasionally review those as well. But those are required to come to our office for a second tier of review. In other words, large sewage disposal systems with design flows greater than 2,000 gallons per day. So here's just a list of our statutory authority, where we get our, again, statutory authority to create regulations for on-site sewage disposal system. I'm not going to dwell on this too much. It's just there so you could cite those. And as we discussed before, how jurisdiction is broken down, it's primarily based on flows and alternative technology at this point. So what I mean by that is any property with a sewage design flow of 7,500 gallons per day or less comes to both DPH and the local health department. And that does not include anything with alternative technology. And alternative technology would be anything other than a conventional septic system, which, as I previously stated, just think of a large septic tank followed by some type of leaching system or drain field. There's several different ways to characterize a leaching system. Some states call it a drain field. We call it a leaching system. So the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, they're the ones that handle obviously on-site, or I'm sorry, municipal sewer systems. So we're talking just large wastewater treatment plants. That's done at deep. They have then they break it down further with on-site sewage disposal systems over 7,500 gallons per day goes to them. So, and that's whether or not it has alternative technology, or systems that have alternative technology, and that would be independent of design flows. Although typically, most of the deep properties that have AT are going to have sewage design flows of over 7,500 gallons per day for the most part. So you don't see a residential home at this point. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're having this whole discussion is at this point, you're not seeing it done for smaller systems. I guess the smallest you could say would be a residential type of situation, a single family home, that type of thing. And lastly would be the local health department. So how that works is they're the ones, in terms of all of the sewage disposal systems, on-site sewage disposal systems that are less than 7,500 gallons per day. So just think of an on-site septic system. All of it is permitted at the local level. So they're the ones that are what I call the boots on the ground. They're the ones that are issuing the permits for these things and doing all the inspections and a lot of the testing and everything else. That's why we train these individuals to do that. And as I previously mentioned, though, for systems over 2,000 gallons per day, that does come to us for a second tier of review. But ultimately, the locals are still responsible for going out there and performing those inspections. So, I mean, there's only, we have 3 engineers at the state level. There's no way that we could do, 169 towns worth of septic systems. We're talking probably 1 million out there. Could be that many of septic systems out there. And so clearly we rely on the locals to do all of that permitting, but we get called out again, very occasionally, I should say, when things go awry or they need technical assistance and that kind of thing. And as I said before, we're the experts, we're the ones that write the regulations. So when there's an issue, they know who to call, which is us. And here it is. I probably should have advanced the slide, but this is basically all of the things that that I discussed in terms of what the local health department's responsibilities are, and there are many. And so, like I said, though, we do the training for them and make sure that they have the skills set to perform their jobs adequately. Any questions at this point?
No, I think we'll just actually, unless folks have questions. Okay, Bob, I see you raise your hand.
I think may want to also make clear, Matt, that the 7,500 gallons per day is per property. Regardless, in other words, the property under the ownership and control of a single entity, be it a house or an investment group or whatever it is. And if it's,
Yeah. So, yeah, I'll expand on what you're saying. Thank you for making that distinction. So what that could mean is if you could have a dozen sewage disposal systems, each with design flows of less than 7,500, but collectively on a single property, if that's 7,500 gallons per day or greater than 7,500 gallons per day, it goes to deep. So it's not just one large 7,500 gallon per day septic system. It could be a collection of many, but ultimately it's the total design flow that's generated on the property. So yes, thank you for making that distinction, because people might be confused as to that. You could have dozens of sewage disposal systems on a single property. But if the design flow collectively is more than 7,500, it does go to deep, or less than 7,500, it stays within our realm. So yes, and that is true. And one of the things that people do, and you brought up a good point, is in order to circumvent the jurisdiction of deep, will often subdivide properties and put them under separate ownership, because if you have contiguous properties and they're under the same ownership, they're still considered a collectively sewage design flow for jurisdictional purposes. But in this case, if they put separate, what most of them do, LLCs, then they circumvent the regulations, and they could have as many as 2, 3, 4, or even a dozen properties, each with 7,500 gallons per day with separate ownership, and not have to go under DEEP's jurisdiction. And that is actually quite often done. So thank you for mentioning that. It's an important point.
Thank you. Do others have questions? Okay, I see Brian. Yep.
Yep, I've got one question. Since advanced treatment systems are required in states surrounding us, why can't we start doing it for single family homes?
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, I can get into the whole discussion on that. It's a lot more complicated than what you would think. So right now, when you have a conventional septic system, the only maintenance associated with that is just pumping your septic tank. And the average homeowner, generally speaking, doesn't have a problem handling that responsibility. And it works quite well. So, but when you put in a mechanical apparatus that requires operation and maintenance in order to function properly, and it costs money and it uses electricity, that's where you start getting into problems with particularly individual homeowners when money gets tight for them, or things of that nature. They just decide that they don't want to maintain these things anymore, or they get tired of paying the additional electric costs and things like that. So when you say other states, in order to assure that these things function properly and ultimately don't cause a health effect or nuisance condition, you need a sufficient amount of oversight to make sure that homeowners are doing what they're supposed to be doing, essentially maintaining these systems. So that's the difficulty here, is getting that in place. We don't have that in either of our sections, whether it's DEEP or DPH. I mean, we don't have the staff levels to do that. There's 3 of us engineers at DPH, and generally speaking, over DEP, it was roughly around the same.
So
in order,
Matt,
yeah.
if I could, I think, to Brian's question is, there's a difficulty of operations and maintenance, and that's true of any system you put anywhere, whether it's water, sewer, anything, right? But this, in particular, your last point is important to know, for everyone to know. We don't have staff for this program in our department. We don't.
Okay, though the companies that sell the system have staff and they monitor the system.
Well,
But-
that is, again, we do not have a program at the state level. You asked the question of us, you asked the question of Matt and the Department of Public Health. We don't have a program on the, as Matt mentioned, he did a very nice job. Thank you, Matt, and presenting, your very succinctly what we do today. We have 3 staff that work really very hard. And again, to understand this, it goes to local health. Local health, there's 62 local health departments in the state of Connecticut. Matt and his team works to train them so that they can understand how to work directly. They're the direct regulators. Matt's team helps with the technical aspect and has the ability to change the regulations. And a lot of people on this call, I see a lot of faces of people who are on our group that help us, move those regulations forward and keep them up to date. So, Senator, I see you turn your camera on. So I don't know if you wanted to say anything.
I don't know if you wanted to chime in, Senator. I was going to just say, and I appreciate your question, Brian, and the way the conversation is going, but I do want to, and I see David has a question. I do want to get into Deep's presentation because I think the point of this meeting is to really have a Q&A with both departments and really see where there may be some crossover that could be helpful in any recommendations this committee seeks to make. So, David, if that changes your interest in asking a question, great. If it does not, feel free to ask your question. And Jennifer, I don't know if yours can wait until Deep or after Deep's presentation, but I'll turn it over to David for right now.
Thank you, Senator. Really, it's a position of just clarity. And I work in New York, I work in Massachusetts, and I work in Rhode Island. We work in those states every day. Those states do not require AT systems. Just to be clear. And as somebody that works in the industry, we work with AT systems every day. And I think one of the benefits we have in Connecticut is we didn't jump on the bandwagon quickly. As they study these technologies, they're finding that some are working well and some are not working at all. And I think I'm an innovator in the industry, but there are times when it pays to be a follower. And I think Connecticut is going to benefit from that. So I'm certainly supportive of looking at these issues. As I said, I think before figuring out what are our goals and objectives and how to get there. But just to say AT and the companies that produce them will protect our environment, it really hasn't been found in these other states yet.
Thanks, David. And Jennifer, I'm going to give you an opportunity to ask.
So I actually don't have a question. I just wanted to say that in my slides, I do have a couple of slides that I think will speak to some of those questions that are being raised, but also speak to Dave's point about other states and realistically where we might want to think about learning from those other states, in fact, on what has happened. So just to speak to the point of requirements, there are some of our neighboring states that do require AT systems in certain sets of circumstances. So if it's a sensitive area, if it's around a salt pond, I mean, there are very, very specific situations and circumstances where they're applying these. So, but I do think a couple of my slides might actually help to answer some of the questions and outline where potentially we could look to learn and move forward.
Thanks, Jennifer. I think that is a great segue into your presentation. Will you be providing the presentation on Deep's behalf?
I will be. I'm probably not going to be quite as smooth as Matt was in the transition to the PowerPoint presentation, but I will certainly do my best. So if I can have the ability to share.
Okay. Yep. I think Will can give that to you.
You'd have that option now.
Okay. You're all set. Or you should be at least.
Okay. Well, let me start my slideshow first. Nope, it didn't work. Hang on. Hopefully it will show up.
You are live.
All right, excellent. Okay. So I think, Matt did a fantastic job in sort of outlining the jurisdiction on septic systems realistically by both DPH and DEEP. So I'm really not going to spend too much time on that. I'm really going to try to frame what I think are the issues that we've been hearing as part of the working group discussions. So, I know jurisdiction was one of those, but I also think that one of the issues has been really revolving around how to create sort of that effective regulatory framework for those systems. And then potential for, learning from the other states that surround us, and really also how to connect sort of our sewage infrastructure as a whole into municipal planning efforts and coordination amongst the different entities. So that's kind of really where I was going with this. So again, not going to spend a lot of time on jurisdiction, just sort of provided the overview on the conventional systems, community sewerage systems, which is really one of the pieces where we still oversee conventional systems that could be small
Jennifer,
systems. Yep.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but can you put your presentation into slideshow mode so that it's just a bit bigger on our screen?
I thought I did.
It's not, I don't know if it's showing up for others in the same way, but
It's my entire screen. So I'm.
Oh, that's interesting because we're not seeing it that way, but it's fine. If others are not having a problem seeing the screen, I just want to make sure that everyone can see what we're.
Let me just wait. Let me just try something else and see if it still shows up again.
There we go.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Yep.
So you're seeing what I'm seeing on my other screen. So because I'm using two screens. So okay. So again, Matt did a great job on outlining jurisdiction. So I just kind of threw this up here. I'm not going to spend much time on it. I will point out that one of the other pieces that really is in DEEP's purview is that the public and private wastewater treatment plants and sanitary sewers. So when I talk about sewage infrastructure, in my mind, that's two things. That is on-site systems that are the larger systems that DEEP regulates, but it's also sanitary sewer infrastructure and the wastewater, the 93 wastewater treatment plants that DEEP regulates across the state. So I think those are sort of two parts of the discussion that also still people need to kind of keep in mind. But certainly we do have many similarities with DPH, but we have some differences as well. And the AT piece of that is probably the biggest difference in terms of the systems that we review. And we do everything at the state level. We don't have that local interaction as much as DPH does. But again, much like DPH, we currently have 2 engineers working in the program that oversees all of these systems across the state. And with the AT systems, those systems require a significant amount of oversight. While currently we really are only issuing permits for large systems, and that's in large part because the typical homeowner has no desire to come to the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection and try to get an individual permit to put an AT system in on their property, with the fees that would be applied to it, with the amount of engineering requirements that are in place and the permit requirements that would also be in place for long-term monitoring and maintenance. So we really haven't seen that. There have probably been a very small handful over the decades that I'm aware of where people have come to us pursuing this. But I think the topic I'd like to focus on a little bit more is that regulatory framework that really needs to be in place. And as Dave pointed out, we've probably done ourselves a favor by not necessarily jumping in with both feet and kind of hanging back and seeing what's happening in the surrounding states, but also, in other parts of the country. And I think that there's a huge potential here. We've heard some discussions about whether or not we could potentially learn from them. I would say we would support a study that would really look at the other programs, really focusing on New England states, but looking at some of the other programs that have been successful or not been successful. There are both programs, across the country. We've seen programs that have been very successful. Suffolk County, Long Island is a program that people are talking about right now that is very successful. I will say they have, I think, 15 people managing that program at a county level. So I think that there are ways to learn from the states that are surrounding us, and really determine what resources would be needed, where the use of these systems is appropriate, what staffing resources are required, whether there are capital funding requirements that are really needed to make these programs successful. The level that the programs are managed. Some are managed at the state level, some are managed at the county level, others are managed at the local level. We could learn from those particular programs on who does what oversight is being required, who's the responsible management entity, what does that entail, what's the required level of operation and maintenance for each of these systems, who provides that service, who pays for that service, do homeowners get charged a fee depending on where they live, and that covers a service provider. What is required for monitoring and sampling from those systems? Who provides that? And again, who tracks it? Who pays for it? What kind of enforcement has been necessary to make those programs successful? I really think those are the lessons that we can learn from the states surrounding us, rather than, starting from scratch and trying to come up with that framework ourselves. I really think that's something that we as a state potentially should be looking at, in terms of framing the regulatory program that needs to be in place. No matter what that looks like, it's going to take resources. As Matt and Lori pointed out, they've got 3 engineers working on these types of state level programs. DEEP has 2 engineers currently working on these types of programs. So there's definitely a resource need. I feel like we're often asked, what would it take? I would look to those other programs and say, what does it really take to make these programs successful? What do they need for resources, and what's the level of oversight that is needed to make them successful? Because what we have seen is programs that have been successful and programs that have been utter failures. I could name a couple of communities where they put in AT systems on a widespread basis, and a few years later, those communities decided to ask to have sewers extended because the systems were not operated and maintained appropriately and became public nuisances. So it's really something we can learn. So the other, so the other question that was asked was about a pilot program, a testing center. Those exist. So Rhode Island has one, Cape Cod has one. Those testing programs, we've looked to those testing programs to provide information to us at this point. They regularly provide information on new and existing technologies, similar weather conditions, similar settings to what we have in Connecticut. We've used the data that they have been able to produce for evaluation of systems here in Connecticut. And we know that these systems actually can treat wastewater to very low levels of pollutants, but they need to be maintained, operated, and cited appropriately. So I think, from DEEP's perspective, we don't feel like there's a need to develop a whole new testing center just for testing technology and getting that data. I do think that if there was some entity, whether it's a Yukon, a CASE, some other entity that is interested in developing a program for education and training, for the opportunity for homeowners to sort of touch and feel these types of systems, we would welcome the opportunity to work with someone and coordinate that kind of effort. But we don't really feel as though there's a need to actually build something new in Connecticut. We've got data from surrounding states. We've got facilities in surrounding states that, again, we could look to for the information that we would be interested in. And we have done that. So then the other piece of the kind of infrastructure conversation from my perspective is a little bit more around what I think people think of more traditionally as infrastructure. And I just wanted to point out some of the existing intersections for infrastructure. From the requirements for municipal water pollution control authorities, those authorities, when they're working on projects, whether it is an update to their wastewater treatment plant, whether it's a proposed extension of sanitary sewers to solve a community pollution problem, those facilities will prepare or update a town-wide water pollution control plan. Typically, that's a requirement if they are looking to get funding through the Clean Water Fund. But state statute only says that they may do it. Doesn't require them to create those plans. It doesn't require them to update them. It's really only a requirement if they're looking for clean water funds. But that is where where municipalities would identify the areas of their town that are served by municipal sanitary sewers, where they plan to extend those at some point in the future, where they intend to avoid them. So if they have conservation areas, lands that they are trying to avoid, and also areas where they have existing community sewerage systems that are not owned by a municipality. So realistically, this is sort of their planning document for where sewers might go, where sewers are not going to be going, or where they might provide some other level of management for on-site systems. And then they also have a requirement under the statutes that cover their municipal plans of conservation and development to identify areas that are served by existing sewage systems, or in areas where they intend to build or extend sewers, and areas that they're going to avoid sewers. So there are some existing requirements for municipalities to identify their sewage infrastructure, both existing and proposed. The other requirement, and this is at a state level, for state agencies actions are required to be consistent with the state plan of conservation and development. So for the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, oftentimes that means where municipalities are proposing sewer extensions, it has to be consistent with the state plan of conservation and development. From DPH's perspective, they have the same requirement for a public water extension. So those are requirements that are already in place that I think help the state coordinate what we know about infrastructure and water and sewer infrastructure and where we construct those things. And I think that one of the things that is at least worth further conversation is ways to increase sort of that municipal and state coordination. So I've said that water pollution control authorities may prepare and update water pollution control plans. Could consider requiring that. Right now it's something that they're only required to do if they're seeking clean water funds, but having towns actually have those plans in place could be beneficial to both the municipality and to the state. I think it would make a lot of sense to consider adding water systems to the infrastructure that's identified in municipal plans of conservation and development. I think, Lori and I have both been known to say water and sewer should go together. If you're going to extend sewers, realistically, you should be thinking about what's your water service, and are you looking at, community wells? Are you looking at those are things that should be linked in people's minds, and in order to link them in people's minds, formality and linking them would, I think, be beneficial as well. And then I think, there is a requirement for municipalities to update their plans of conservation and development, but there's not a requirement for those to be consistent with the state plan of conservation development. And municipal water pollution control plans are not required to be consistent with the state plan of conservation and development. So, again, opportunities for more coordination at the state and local level. State agency actions are required to be consistent with the state plan of conservation and development. Is there some value in requiring municipal actions to be consistent as well? So in my mind, just sort of some things that could be considered to increase that coordination that infrastructure planning, that infrastructure inventory, that I think will help really drive and focus appropriate development patterns. Because I think one of the things that we've talked about is, I know there's been a large focus on AT systems, residential use of AT systems, but in my mind, the picture is really about infrastructure in general and water and sewer and how to utilize those types of infrastructure to support appropriate development. So that's all I've got, but I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Jennifer. That was very helpful, and actually is a great opportunity to frame, I think, what hopefully will be a good conversation. I am not able to see everyone all the time, so if you do have a question, please use the raised hand function. It just would be easier for everyone. And let's try to have a productive conversation. So I'll take questions if anyone has them, and I'll save mine for after the conversation begins. So any questions? Okay, Bob, I see you.
There we go. It's more like a comment. One of the things you did not discuss, and I understand that, is zoning. Where typically you're not going to get sewer extensions when you got 2 acre zoning. It's just not efficient, it's not useful. And the fear of the townspeople, or if you bring it in, the zoning will change to a higher density, and we know what that's a nasty word. How do you deal with that? I guess the proper word is conundrum. They're just not compatible with each other unless there's a lot of education and community discussion and planning that goes into that. But you can't avoid zoning as an issue when it relates to sewer expansion or improvement.
Bob, I would agree with you. I think that's a larger conversation for the general group or commission rather. Are there other questions? Matt, go right ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say a nice job, Jen. Thank you. You hit on a lot of great points, and I just wanted to reiterate some of the things that Jen had mentioned, and just to put in perspective to you of what's required. When you say, and I actually had the privilege of going over to Suffolk County and observing their program. They actually had a mini conference for observers to come in and see how their program ran and what it involved and everything else. So we absolutely would not reinvent the wheel. We would just cherry pick from what other states do. But again, just put in perspective, we're talking one county in New York with 15 people. Okay, 15 people in order to get this thing to work. And just one other thing I just want to mention, when it comes to oversight of these, yes, one of the other individuals was mentioning about getting the manufacturers involved. Absolutely, and that's what Suffolk County does. But you still realize that you have to have a tracking mechanism, an enforcement mechanism by typically a government entity that's going to take action. So that way, then there's some teeth to somebody not maintaining their system. So yes, you'll have the manufacturers letting us know, because let's say the contract is terminated, the contract you have, let's say with a service provider that maintains your system, and we would rely on, let's say, the contractor to alert us, because the homeowner's not going to alert us because they don't want us to know, because they don't want to get any penalties. But so that would be an example of how it would work. So, but it's a lot more complex than you think, than just plugging something in and walking away. And there's a lot more to it than that. And I I thought Jen was very good at putting that up. So I just wanted to throw that out there. So thank you.
Okay, and I guess we'll run through a couple of the questions we have right now, and then maybe reframe the conversation in terms of next steps. Nelson.
Yeah, on the state plan of conservation and development, is there one specific, is there just the one, or is there one specific that includes wastewater, or that has wastewater special?
you want
you
me to
know?
answer that? There is the state plan of conservation and development.
So it's all buried in there. Okay. And the other thing is you mentioned, we're talking with Department of Public Health and DEEP. But part of the sewer discussion, there's somebody here from housing, has to do with the push for affordable housing. And it seems to me that needs to be integrated in some way. And then the COGs are getting more and more active and have their own plants as well. So it's a little bit difficult for a municipality to figure out who's on first in with these different jurisdictions. And now that the COGs are getting more active and have their own plans, and they're looking at the housing too. And so there's this requirement to have 10% of your housing be affordable incentive and all that. So and there's a lot of small towns don't have the infrastructure at all. Some don't even have source systems at all. So and it seems to me that some sort of accommodation needs to be made for, their waste treatment plants. So that's just a comment. And then you mentioned that you have jurisdiction over large AT systems. Some of them are quite large. And what is the size of the large ones? Or what are you thinking of in terms of like for a small municipality, would they qualify for that sort of a thing?
So I think the when you talk about the jurisdiction for AT systems, currently, although the jurisdiction for the small AT systems was delegated to DPH within available resources, and once regulations were implemented, all AT systems would currently have to come to DEEP for permitting. So it would be AT of any size. But the ones that we actually have in place permitted through our programs in Connecticut right now really run the gamut. So most of them are over the 5,000 gallon per day that used to be the regulatory threshold.
Okay.
We do have some that are actually smaller than that by in the thousands, but we also have some that are 10 times that. We have AT systems that are up to 100,000 gallons per day. We also have small municipal wastewater treatment plants that are regulated through our municipal facilities program that may have discharges either to the ground or to a surface water. So those could potentially be even larger.
So so we're looking at some that are maybe pre-packaged, pre-engineered waste treatment plants, and there's, I don't know, maybe a dozen manufacturers in America now. And so are they part of your jurisdiction at DEEP? And are they considered alternative or just considered conventional?
So I think I would need more information on those types of systems that you're referring to by sort of packaged. When I think of something along the lines of a recirculating sand filter, some type of a BioClear system, there are a whole host of different technologies that we have permitted in the state under our jurisdiction. But when we're talking about these smaller systems, when you talk about sort of the off-the-shelf small AT systems that would be for a residential home, we have not permitted those here in Connecticut. And part of that is because of this need to establish a regulatory program and framework to make that really effective.
Thank you, Jennifer and Nelson. In the interest of time, I'm going to just allow David and Alicia to ask their questions so that we can move on to hopefully next steps. David?
I guess I think Jen, the presentation's great. A couple of points, maybe a clarification. I was involved with the inception of the working group that set up the Suffolk County program. And just understand many millions of dollars have been given to that program to make it move. They really don't have that many sites in relative to Barnstable County, Mass. The reason I said these ATs aren't really required on a state level. Oftentimes it's Barnstable County requires it for certain instances, and so on, Suffolk County. But Barnstable County has been at it for many, many years. Barnstable County has fought very hard to get all the performance data from these systems and be able to graph it to make some good educated decisions on what seems to be working and what does not. They do find that certain operators who sample their own systems have very good results, but they're not repeatable when other entities do it. So there's things like this, and we don't want to, make the same mistakes. Barnstable County also operates the Massachusetts Test Center. It's the preeminent facility in the world, and their knowledge can be applied to the results in the field, which is also critical. Rhode Island has a demonstration facility. Now, University of Rhode Island is one of the top groups certainly in the world in wastewater microbiology of soils. Even they use the Mass Test Center. So I think we would be far, and so does Stony Brook uses the Mass Test Center in Long Island. They've got some great data, and the balance they bring of scientists there and practical field experience, I truly don't think we could catch up to them without a huge investment. As much as I'd like to see UConn involved in her own state, I don't know if it would really move the ball forward quickly enough. We might be better off having an arrangement with them. And many Connecticut companies already work there. So, and it's a facility testing in our climate. Many people try to test in Texas. There's another NSF facility down there in Waco. It's warm. It's really easy to hit your nitrogen numbers. You go to Cape Cod, you start learning. So, I think it's a great opportunity to do things properly now and take advantage of people who've done it the wrong way.
Thank you, David.
Thank
and
you.
Alicia.
I just wanted to say, Jen, I really appreciated the recommendations that you put forward. Being able to look at everything that we need, all the boxes we have to check to utilize various technologies to solve the problems that we do have, but also looking at the problem we have of planning going forward, because I know I've heard Lori say it a million times. The last thing we look at when we're looking at any sort of development is water and wastewater, and it seems like it should be the first thing we look at. And so I really hope that as a committee we can take what Jen has put out for recommendations and together come to a consensus on that, because I think what she laid out there is, a fantastic beginning. And I honestly couldn't see too much that needs to be added to it, except my worry when we talk about leaving the towns to do things. When we talk about water quality, it's really problematic that we do things in 169 different ways when it comes to land use decisions. And that is our biggest barrier to solving any water quality problems we have here in Connecticut. So I just want to throw that out there as a concern, because sometimes we fix a problem and it almost makes fixing other problems much worse down the line, because it may create another problem. And again, it's only solvable in 169 different ways, and it makes it impossible. So I'll just throw that out there.
Thank you, Alicia. That was well said. And Senator Cohen, you raised your hand.
Yeah, and Donna, if we want to move into some discussion around those recommendations, I'm fine with that. But I just wanted to, sort of on the heels of what Alicia was saying, I think that's right, that we need to be really careful. And I think, Jennifer, thank you so much for your presentation, because I think you really provided us with a great framework of recommendations that the subcommittee can really sort of sink our teeth into, discuss and perhaps move forward. I do think, to Alicia's point, as we study best practices, I think that will unveil some of what other places are doing in terms of municipal regulation and how that ties in with state reg with regard to alternative treatment systems, and hopefully provide that regulatory framework that we'll need. Although I do think perhaps we need to be working on both concurrently as we study best practices and start to come up with that regulatory framework for how Connecticut could move forward. I also think what I'm hearing is that there's a little bit of a question mark as to whether or not we need further research done within the state of Connecticut if we're already looking at best practices throughout the country. So whether or not we should bring in our friends at UConn, to David's point, or perhaps CASE, which I think is a terrific resource underutilized in the state of Connecticut. So that's something that I think maybe we can throw out to the group and along with everything else, but decide whether or not that's something that we need in our recommendations. And also that municipal piece, updating their plans of conservation and development to include sewer and water, and what that would look like for municipalities. It certainly is a benefit for everybody involved, including the municipalities themselves. But what that looks like for them and what sort of burden that places on the municipalities, I'd be interested to hear as well. So just throwing those questions out there to start the conversation.
Thank you, Senator Cohen. I actually also wanted to echo those comments and to say, Jennifer, thank you. You really did, I think, give us an opportunity to start with something in terms of what may come out of this subcommittee. And all of us keeping in mind, obviously, there's a greater commission with which was created in order to create synergies between all these conversations we're having, where it be zoning or sewerage or affordable housing. So hopefully everything that these other subcommittees are recommending will, find an opportunity within that general report to create some synergies and moving forward, have some more efficient planning opportunities. So as we're kind of winding down on time, I know, David, you still had your hand up and you're first in my screen. Are you still interested in asking another question? Okay. Bill, I'll offer you an opportunity and then hopefully we could talk more specifically. I have them written down in terms of what Jennifer just generally recommended. And I just want to kind of get the sense of the group in terms of which one we can start with perhaps in this conversation as we run down on time. Bill?
Actually, I might have been jumping the gun because I was kind of moving on to that.
Okay.
And having worked on 2 plans of conservation and development locally and 1 COG plan of conservation and development, the last 2 local ones and the COG one were based on the draft POCD, which the legislature took 3 years to approve. So to me, we in all those cases, we tried to work with the state, the flow down state COG POCD, and we did include water needs and sewerage and stuff. But I really think that's the means, and so I support that totally. I think it's great. And with the new requirement for training for commissioners, I think that's the means for people to know more about what's in the flow down and make it work together. I also clearly think you need that DPH and DEP need the resources to make this happen. And I think the administration might be less cumbersome nowadays with online systems, and if the state invested in one that could be used elsewhere, which is being done, I think, with building codes, that could reduce the need for investment. Thanks.
Thank you, Bill. And I know, Jennifer, you have your hand up. I just wanted to make a comment. I just learned that there is a subcommittee meeting immediately following this one. So Will did let me know that there is a hard stop at 4. So keeping that in mind, Jennifer, I'll let you take the floor. And then I know Tom's been trying to ask a question. Oh, you're on mute.
I don't know how I got muted. So just wanted to throw something out there in terms of hearing folks bring up Yukon and Case as sort of potential partners. Even though I think, from Deep's perspective, we don't feel as though there's a need for, a large investment in additional sort of testing, piloting, studying, building sort of that infrastructure here in the state. Perhaps those would be good partners to help us move forward in sort of if we wanted to move forward in a recommendation to look at other neighboring states or other programs in other states. That might be something that if there's an interest at Case or, with Yukon, that we could potentially form a partnership on something like that.
I think that's a great recommendation, and one I think we can add into your recommendation of a study just generally. So Tom, your question.
Thank you. Again, I'm from Avon, and I've been on, and I still am on the WPCA and the planning and zoning. I have no problem with Jennifer's recommendation that the COPD contains both water and sewer. That's absolutely no problem. I'd like to think about if it has to be consistent with the state plan, because I'd want to see what the state would be thinking about first before I would necessarily agree with that. But I certainly have no problem with the local. Also, just to let the group know that's on the phone here, I did write to the co-chairs here, and I spoke to a couple people. I believe Jennifer was one, and DPH and COPD, another group, with regard to some recommendations, some which were statutory, some which were best management practices. I have no problem if you put that up for the group to take a look at, because I'd be very interested in what they think about it. One of the biggest problems I see is a maze of enforcement problems and difficulties, overlapping, confusing. And I think what we need to do is instill in those parties, and I look at the municipality, DPH, and DEEP as having cross jurisdiction, but come up with something that would give them less of a financial and time-consuming basis to get some form of action where there are sewage problems. Let's put it that way. But I have no problem with that document going up to everybody.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate that. And perhaps in the meantime, we'll pull all of these recommendations together so folks can see them in one document. And Senator Cohen, I know you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I know. I just a suggestion, because we have 2 minutes left. And we've had so many great recommendations. I wonder if we might put together, you and I, Donna, could sort of put together a list based on what we've discussed here today, what Jennifer's presented, and to create sort of a framework for the group, that items that are up for consideration for our final recommendation. I know we don't want to be doing a lot of business over email, but I think in this case, sort of putting those points out and gaining consensus, or maybe having a little bit of discussion over email in this case might not be a bad idea.
Yep, I totally agree with you. And obviously with 1 minute left, we will take care of that. Senator Cohen and I will work offline, send those recommendations over to all of you, and then hopefully also have an opportunity to set or schedule our next meeting as we're thinking about these recommendations on our own. So with that, unless there are other comments, and unless Senator Cohen, you have anything else, I think we can close our business for today. Thank you to both DPH and DEEP for your presentations. We really appreciate you being with us.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much.